Hello, everybody. This is Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm José.
I'm Mike.
And today we have as a special guest Laura Creven, event planner, gal about town, and huge film fan, as well as a prominent blogger. So we wanted to have her here, especially today, because we are looking at our third Michael Curtiz film. Fourth Michael Curtiz film, Mildred Pierce, and it's a very, very famous Warner Brothers mixture of film noir and women's film, and we thought it would be really, kind of interesting to have, a woman's point of view on a woman's film. So what did you think of it, Laura?
I loved it. I really enjoyed it.
So what did you enjoy about it? What resonated with you?
I enjoyed that a lot of the interesting characters were women, and actually the male characters were a little bit more two-dimensional. Ideally, it would be nice to have everybody as rounded figures, but usually we're so used to seeing it the other way round.
Right.
And it was nice to see that the kind of focus and the intrigue were on the kind of main characters, both the mother and daughter, but also the kind of side characters were still strong females as well.
Okay, interesting. What did you think, Mike? Because I know we had to drag him here. Though he's being very kind. It's his fourth Michael Curtiz film.
Yes. I liked it, I've got a bit of a cold as well. That might explain my voice. I did like it, and for the same reasons that you did, Laura, as well as being... it sets up this mystery at the start of you see this guy get shot and he says Mildred.
Yes.
And you think, oh, maybe that's the name of his sled, but clearly the question is who killed him and why. And then the film is this kind of extended flashback, this story that's being told. That just the mystery of, who he is and who Mildred is and all the people around him, what exactly happened. It's a really fascinating one to follow. And even when it gets to the end, it's not quite clear. It keeps on changing right until the very end.
Yes. It's quite a... I mean, did the flashback structure work for you? The fact that, you think one thing, then you're taken back through a person's memory, and then you're taken back through another person's memory, and, it's a flashback structure that explains the present.
Yeah, I thought it worked well. I think... Interestingly, I was less interested in the mystery of the setup with the shooting. I'm more interested in the character development. I'd almost forgotten by the end of it that that's what we were trying to solve.
Oh, how interesting.
Because I think the characters were really interesting, and you could see that, and the daughter character, who was a piece of work.
Yes.
That interplay between them and how that worked and kind of how much she could manipulate her mother was fascinating, I thought. And just how much the mother could forgive. At the end, I kind of didn't really care who killed him. I was just quite happy to watch their interplay.
Okay, how interesting. So really kind of at the core of it is really the mother-daughter relationship, right? Which is very weird. It's not. I can't remember. I mean, I can think of other films where mothers love their daughters as much, but I can't remember another film where a mother loves an evil daughter that's so evil that much.
I don't think it's a massively unusual thing, that kind of almost mother's guilt. I think it's probably less played out in big cinematic things, and you probably see more of it in things like soap operas.
Right.
I feel like I've seen it a lot on things like EastEnders.
Really?
Yeah, it feels like quite a bit of a trope, that kind of sense of guilt that some mothers might have, and they try and do their best for the daughter, which is something that she brings up quite a lot in the film, and just how far that can be pushed.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I of course know that, there's a whole genre about maternal melodrama, right? And it's about mother love and what mothers sacrifice for their children and so on. But I can't remember an instance where, you know, the mother is that enraptured by a daughter who's so evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so is that common in soap operas and EastEnders? I mean, that you know, because for me, Veda I mean, she's really kind of the most evil figure of womanhood I can think of in cinema. I mean, I've never seen somebody just like so bad.
She's just kind of low-key bad though, isn't she? Like, she's clearly the villainess of the film, but she never does anything that you would stereotypically expect to be a big, massive thing. It's all kind of digs and things, and in that sense I think it's quite female focused in that it doesn't have to be a big, massive kind of, I know there's a shooting in the film, but there isn't that big drama. It's that kind of almost chipping away, that manipulation that you see, and I think it's, in that sense, it's quite female.
I guess so.
I mean, it's a constant knocking down of her mother.
Yes.
And, you know, because her mother's always, her whole thing is trying to provide for her, and at one point, Monty says, everything you do is for your daughter. It's like, you know, so everything she's ever done is try and provide for her daughter and give her the life that she never had and so on. And it's never enough for Veda. And it's that constant, every time they interact, there's a comment, you know, about who you are, the fact that you work for a living, that you're not given stuff, all that kind of thing.
Yes.
Constant knocking down of her mum.
Yes, I mean...
And in a way, I kind of thought, like, on the one hand, she's a really good mum, because she's always working hard and trying to provide and so on. On the other hand, she's kind of a really bad mum, because that kid needs some discipline. Do you know what I mean?
I think, for me, the thing that I would have liked to have seen explored a little bit more, but I think would have taken away from the whole whodunit, is the difference between Veda and Katie. And I know they sort of say, you know, Katie loved you, so you don't try as hard.
Yes.
But to me, that kind of interplay is why the mother felt that she had to kind of keep trying.
Yes.
And try and win her over, and just ultimately never did.
Yes.
But actually kind of had that there with Katie, who was a more boyish character. And actually the two women that she got on well with are, and this is not going to be terrible names, her kind of, the woman that says that Ida?
Yes, it's
the second in command at the restaurant.
Eve Arden.
Who is portrayed as being a bit more masculine. She talks about being kind of depicted as being one of the boys, and then Katie, as you see her first playing American football out with the boys in the street. And it's interesting that actually the two women that she gets on with both have, I thought, more masculine characteristics, whereas Veda, who is very feminine in it, and she's always portrayed as beautiful and wearing lots of jewellery, is the one that she just can't seem to connect with.
That's very interesting, I think. Yeah, because, you know, so the film is making an argument about, you know, femininity and mothers and daughters and so on. And then it's kind of, so you're arguing, I suppose, that the women that the film makes sympathetic are those that have more, in quotation marks, masculine traits, including Mildred, arguably.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if they're making them more sympathetic. I think they're making, or Mildred seems to connect better with them.
Right.
She seems to, or she doesn't connect with Katie, but Katie is kind of seen as she's a fairly kind of neither here nor there character, but is portrayed fairly neutrally, if anything, slightly positively. But it's that connection that Mildred doesn't seem to make, which I thought was interesting.
Okay, the film has been spoken of in a lot of ways, right? So it's a classic. They originally thought they wouldn't be able to make it at all, this novel, because, you know, it's adulterous and it has crime and all of these things kind of contravened the censorship board of the time. So there had to be kind of a lot of changes made to be able to make it at all. And part of the way that they got around it was this flashback structure, right? That kind of, you know, you split things amongst different people and therefore you can only see certain things. I think the film is I was kind of looking at these things about the women's film, and actually, one of the books I was reading was saying, well, we tend to forget, but Hollywood studios assumed that most of their customers were women, and so that's why so many films were made for women, and actually, it's only the male critics who have privilege certain genres over others. So, there's a lot written about the gangster film or film noir or, but actually kind of 90% of films have romances, right? Or about romance in some way, right? Either, the primary or the secondary characteristic. And yet it still seems to me unusual to have like these incredibly vibrant women and these incredibly powerful women at the focus of this film, all that you mentioned, including the maid, which is kind of it's quite a substantial comic role, that she plays. So I think that's kind of quite extraordinary to see. And now I can't find her name. And she's one of the most famous black actresses in the whole history of Hollywood cinema. She was in Gone with the Wind. Let's see.
Butterfly
McQueen, sorry. Yeah.
Brilliant name.
I know. But, kind of the film is focused on all of these women, isn't it? It's not the guys, really.
But there is something interesting about the guys where, so you're talking about Mildred getting on with more kind of masculine, the more masculine characters amongst the women, as it were, and being kind of more masculine herself as well. She runs a business, she lives the kind of American dream, which I guess is kind of associated with masculine qualities of kind of taking what you want and that sort of thing. But the men in the film are they're varied, but they are generally less masculine in that respect. So you've got Monty, who does nothing. Yes. He lives a life of leisure, and by life of leisure, it's not one that he kind of can afford. He has a bit of money that he appears to have. It's like family money, and a kind of family mansion and things. But he's selling this place. That's why they meet, because he wants to get rid of this place. He ends up taking money from Mildred when she's making a lot, and he's got nothing, and he kind of doesn't want to, because she offers it him in public, and that's incredibly embarrassing for him. But he does, and all of a sudden, very, very quickly, taking a bit of money that's very embarrassing becomes the thing that he does. He just takes money on. Her husband, right at the start, who is a good guy and so on and so forth, and kind of a good dad, doesn't have a job. That's how you're introduced to him. He doesn't have a job, and he doesn't really appear to be looking for one.
He does have a job at the beginning. They split in the real estate. That's the way he goes home. So you get the impression that he is a good guy, but not the most dependable.
I thought it was... He's lying down on the couch at the start and she says...
No, he walks in from the real estate. It's him and the...
He gets fired.
That's right. Oh, right, okay, sorry. I didn't pick up on that.
Well, it's not even that he gets fired. It's actually Wally takes over. He's partners with Wally.
Oh, right.
There's a slump in the business... And Wally takes over, like he tries to do to Mildred later on, at the end of the film. So the film has these interesting kind of parallels, but nonetheless, you get the impression that he's not the guy with the most pep.
He's not the go-getter that you kind of want.
But then the film also makes you question, why be a go-getter? I mean, look where it gets Veda, who wants everything. I mean, what's wrong with just wanting to have a house and a family and be okay?
But he didn't just want a house and a family, because he had a bit on the side.
Yes, which is very clear. Yeah, Mrs. Biederhoff.
At first, I didn't think... At first, when she rings up, I thought, that can't actually be an affair, because no one would be stupid enough to just ring up in the middle of the day. But clearly the film just like, no, that is how an affair works in these days.
Though the film is so clever because you're not meant to be showing that, really. Yeah, like kind of, so the way that it goes about showing that without actually telling you that is, I think, quite clever, actually. And I like that they make Mrs. Biederhoff really nice.
Yeah.
So she's not just some evil kind of other woman.
I quite enjoyed as well. It's surprisingly witty. I think a lot of the kind of wit in it as well works very well for contemporary audience. So lots of the kind of jokes, particularly Wally, or whatever his name is.
Yes.
Yeah, Wally Fay.
I mean, some of his things just
are great.
Yeah, they're brilliant one-liners.
Yes.
And they get around that kind of sense, because everybody knows what he's saying, but he's not deliberately saying it. So I think he has some great lines in it. He's probably the most interesting male character of the lot, I think.
Yes.
And I kind of think it's almost a shame you didn't get to see what would happen with him and Mildred.
Yes, well, but he's so sleazy, though.
Is he the most interesting, or is he just the most entertaining? So I think I think what's interesting about Monty is the way that he is kind of so useless. Whereas Wally is sort of the more quote unquote traditionally masculine. He does kind of go for what he wants. He doesn't always get it. I mean, he's always going after Mildred, but he, as you say, it's very entertaining when he does, and how he kind of deals with being rebuffed and keeps on trying and so on. It makes him entertaining, but I'm not sure it makes him interesting, because he's kind of what I would expect from a certain male character in these films. Do you know what I mean?
I think I wanted to see that kind of cat and mouse thing play out a little bit more, so you kind of get the impression that he's been after her for a while, and she knows that, and she kind of uses it to her advantage a little bit. Yes. And then he kind of tries to get one over, pardon the pun, on her through kind of firstly her husband, and then secondly through her business, and you kind of get the impression that interplay has been going on for a while. So I think it would almost be interesting to kind of see what happens once the credits roll, and if that story continued.
Yes, though at the end that really she loves her husband and she's going back to him.
Yeah, which just felt like a bit of a cop-out, I thought.
I don't know, actually. I don't think it's a cop-out. I think that, to me, it makes sense that she would go with her husband. The film at all times tells you, kind of how she feels about him, and, the trust and the comfort that they have with each other, actually. I mean, they go through a major trauma, which is, the death of a daughter, without blaming each other, which they could easily have done. So I think for me, Mildred is enthralled with her daughter. She's in love with her daughter at the exclusion of everything else. But, kind of, I don't think that anything, that you see about the husband is so bad. And actually, I do think that there's also kind of some question about, when, how important Mrs. Biederhoff is, and when the actual affair with her starts, and then the joke about finally somebody married Mrs. Biederhoff, right? So I mean, I don't know. To me, Mildred and her husband kind of make a certain kind of sense.
The film has a kind of attitude to love and attraction, wherein it's sort of even-handed. Like, you shouldn't be having an affair, but at the same time, the film is kind of saying you are allowed to fall in and out of love with whoever you like, in a way. So it is a bad thing that he was having an affair with Mrs. Biederhofer. But that it's a mistake. It's not a kind of, it breaks up their marriage. But it's not saying that she can never forgive him for. She remains in love with him.
Oh, but see, I don't think it was just that. I think the affair was the kind of icing on the cake, but he makes a comment, doesn't it, about the cakes that she'd been making to afford the dress that the daughter didn't like, and he'd kind of been like, you're showing I can't provide for you, and it's just, I would have liked to have seen, to get to the ending that it did, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more about him respecting her, because it just felt to me a bit of a cop-out.
But he has that scene.
He learns to respect her when he gives her the divorce in the end. He says, I was. He doesn't say I was jealous, but it basically was saying, I was jealous and I didn't think you could make it, and I was being kind of harsh to you. But I've watched you and realised that you can make a perfectly good go of it, and I'm sorry for the way I behaved.
Yeah,
He actually says it. He says, you can have the divorce. I was wrong.
Yeah, I just didn't buy it.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's interesting, because I think that is something that the film hangs a lot of its plot on you kind of buying it, in the sense that, when they leave the police station, she could have left with Wally, right? She could have left alone, but no, she leaves with, kind of the man she married when she was 17.
Yeah. I think it would have been far too kind of outrageous, but I wanted her to kind of go and high-five Ida and then go off and start a franchise or something. Yeah, I wanted it to go like, yeah. I totally get what you're saying, and she does that big wide-eyed thing whenever he appears throughout the film. And she just has some brilliant eyebrow raises, like so many bits within that film of just her eyes acting was superb, I thought.
I want to throw something at you, because one of the ways that the film was adapted to be able to be made, right, was that they lifted Mildred into a different class. So in the novel, she's really like a poor person, right? And then kind of, in order to make a film of her, they had to turn her into middle class, right? Somebody with a nice house in the suburbs and, and so on. And that's kind of the way that they could get around the censors, because things happening to a middle class woman have, different import than if it's to a really poor woman, right? But it seems to me that one of the things that I haven't seen discussed so much in relation to the film, to me, the one almost like the central thing that the film is about is actually class. It's the source of all the conflicts, between the mother and the daughter. You smell of grease, right? It's the only way that Monty is understandable, right? He's not someone who has more money. He's just of a different class of people. Yeah. Right. And kind of part of the problem with Wally is, he's really smart. He knows how to make a buck, right? But he belongs in every dive in town, right? Like you won't see him at the polo.
Yeah, he'd be very new money, wouldn't he?
Well, he'd be like, kind of, new money, buy a gold toilet and bring a hooker in, right? So what do you think? I mean...
I think it'd be interesting to kind of read more about that level of class, because they do at several points make a joke about middle class kind of things, as though that's the kind of the lower structure. And I don't know a massive amount about American class systems, because there's very much that kind of, no, we don't have one, but clearly everywhere does. I think it would almost be interesting, because that structure felt very much more almost British in a sense. So that idea of the kind of crumbling stately home that nobody can afford. Yes. How many of those can you go and visit a weekend? Yes. It's very kind of like that, and they get sold off and turned into hotels or kind of amusement centres. So I think that worked well. I think they could have made more of it, but I think it would have detracted from some of the story. I think it was interesting. Again, it would have been almost interesting to have more working class characters within that, to see the interplay between Veda, who was very much like, we cannot live like this. Yes. It shouldn't be this, and you're like, well, that's your mother. Like, so half of you is that.
Yes.
There are working class characters as kind of background dressing quite a lot.
Yes.
You see them in the background, but particularly, and this is where the film casts black actors as well for the most part.
Yes.
As maids and so on. Maids, waitresses, you see them in the background of scenes, kind of, waiting tables or cleaning dishes, that sort of thing. Right at the very end, I thought it was noticeable that as they're coming out of the police station, it's like the second to last shot is the two of them walking out, and right in the foreground, in the bottom right of the frame, are these two women cleaning the floor.
Yes. Very significant, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's not there for no reason, and this is the absolute end of the film, because the next shot is the sort of, sunrise and the end.
Yes.
So I didn't kind of know what to make of that exactly. It was so privileged to see it. The kind of, I don't know, the kind of comparison it was drawing, or what it was trying to say.
Well, I think Laura's thing about the class system and things that you associate with Britain, the crumbling mansion and so on. There's an element to that, But, what is very American about the film is that it acknowledges class. So, she begins as a suburban housewife, really. And then she becomes a waitress, which is going lower, right? And then she ends up owning the mansion and buying the husband and whatever. So, on the one hand, the figures that represent certain class, you can see how maybe certain British traditions influence that. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, that class mobility, both up and down, right, and how quickly people maneuver through it, right? I mean, that's very American.
Yeah.
The fact that, you can have a chain of restaurants like in Jum. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that social mobility that you would see in that, which was almost Snakes and Ladders-esque, you wouldn't typically see in a British film or show. I mean, if you look at something like Downton Abbey, you have the chauffeur that marries into the family, and that is constantly commented on, and he is never really one of the family. He's always the chauffeur that married one of the daughters. But it was interesting that actually Mildred was never the woman that married what would have been an aristocrat had that been anywhere else. It was
there is a newspaper that's shown when she marries Monty. There is a newspaper headline that says businesswoman marries
heir.
That's it, business heir.
Yes.
So it is tangentially a little bit mentioned, but you're right. The thing of America does have a class system. It does have its sort of dynasties.
Yeah.
Names like Kennedy and Bush and things
Armie
like that.
Hammer.
Is it?
Yes.
Well, there you go. Roosevelt, things like that. So it does have this, and if you get, in the original colonies kind of area as well, you do get these huge old mansions that are still there,
sure.
and some of them I'm sure are crumbling.
Yes.
So it does have that, but the social mobility thing is, I think it's right that it's more active, more believable in American stories, and I think that's when I referred to Mildred as kind of living the American dream. That's kind of what I'm referring to. Like,
yes.
Think of you can start from absolutely nowhere. You can, the thing of accepting immigrants. Bring us your week, or I can't remember what the phrase is, but bring us blah blah blah, because this is where the American dream is. You can make anything of yourself.
Yes.
That's not something that is promised to English people.
No.
But it is of Americans.
Let's move on a little bit to talk about other properties of the film, because one of the things that the film is famous for, it's just that it's a film noir, right? So it uses, a lot of techniques like, shadows and, particular angles and so on. I mean, what did you make of it?
I liked them. I think for me it just gave a real sense that you could see the characters, and there was a lot of kind of shots of the face doing very dramatic looks, which I think helped kind of move the plot on a little bit. But just some really great facial expressions going on. And again, some of the actresses, just their ability to say so much with just their eyes, I thought was fascinating.
Well, I want to ask you about Joan Crawford in a minute. Mike, do you have anything to say about, like the shots and the lighting?
Look at it. Well, I was, having watched a few Curtiz now, I was kind of paying attention to certain things, particularly shadows and particularly mirrors, and the way that Curtiz, I think what's common about both of those, for the most part, is Curtiz likes to use them to, as you've said, generate off-screen space. So what you can see in the frame is not the end of the scene, because if someone's casting a shadow but you can't see them, then they're somewhere else. And a mirror lets you see things that aren't they are in the frame, I guess, but they're kind of behind whatever.
Yes, behind the camera.
Exactly, behind the camera. So and that's all very kind of, it's all very elegantly done. Like, for instance, when the scene where Monty is romancing Mildred, it starts off on a shot of the kind of full length wall mirror.
Yes.
And she's kind of fixing her hair, and camera pans over to them, and then at the end of the scene when they're embracing, it pans back because she says turn the record off because it's got to the end and it's skipping, and so the camera turns back so you can see the mirror again with the two of them still embracing, and the record that they're not going to turn off because they're involved with each other.
But that was a classic kind of what you would do now, fade away, isn't it? what all rom-coms do, but I suppose
I think that was really absolutely brilliant. You know, because so on the one hand, it's a kind of a cliche, right? They kiss while the record continues turning.
But I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to say is I think that sense has continued on, because actually now if you watch anything that is a 12-15 kind of rom-com, that fade away into kind of looking at the bit but not is quite commonly used.
But
I think what that shot was doing though, what you were seeing in the mirror was the same as you would have seen. I mean, it was basically the same as you were seeing when you looked at them straight on, which was not very much because his back was obscuring her. So you know they're kissing. So what the shot's achieving by panning away and going to the mirror is it brings in the record. So she's said, turn the record off, and it's not going to happen. And it being in the frame is kind of emphasising that, like the record's right here and they're kissing right there and it's next to each other.
Yeah, but I think that is commonly used. I think now it's commonly used, which I think says a lot about that film, is that actually it has inspired a lot of other kind of ones to tell the story of what you know is happening without really showing you it.
It has, but I think this shot is actually doing more than that. It's greater than that. Because as it shows you them lost in passion, right? The record player kind of juxtaposing the continued embrace that they're not getting up to answer. What it's also telling you is this is the mirror that started off the film. The film starts with him being shot, right? And you have like the two plonk. So actually, this kind of desire that continues after the music goes is also kind of an intimation of death.
His use of mirrors, Curtiz, it's elegant, and what I mean by elegant is that he uses them cleverly to allow you to look at two things at once and draw an inference between them. You know, so like when she when Mildred's looking for a job, there's that shot of I forget the kind of business that she's going to, but
she goes to the restaurant. Yeah,
is that what has the mirror on the ground? Is that the restaurant?
That's right. Yeah. It has help wanted on top.
No, it's like a shop or something.
Oh yeah, I thought it was a shot. I thought it was before she got to the restaurant. There's just some shot that she's standing outside.
With the words on the bit.
That's it. Yeah. And the mirror is kind of on the ground, kind of pointing up, sort of angled up. So the camera is looking down at this mirror, and you see her within it, but you also know that it's the shot that she is kind of looking at. Kind of having to accept that she's going to look for employment at.
Yes.
So you could do that with a couple of cuts, a couple of shots, whatever. But it's putting them together and kind of enclosing her within this sort of very narrow. It's a very narrow, wide mirror. It's
an extraordinary image, aside from everything else.
I suppose it's the sense of kind of she's not literally, but that kind of idea of her being in the gutter and having to pull herself up. It's that kind of
I think that's part of it. Yeah, and there's another one with the use of shadows right at the very beginning when she's kind of it seems trying to frame Wally for the murder. All the doors are locked, and you realise that something's going on. Then he sees the body, and he has to get out. And there are all these shadows being cast, huge shadows on the wall of him.
That's fantastic.
And there's one shot in particular where you see this. I think you've seen the shadow first. I can't remember, but he's in the centre of the frame at one point, and he's only sort of half height of the frame maybe, but the shadow is all the way up the wall and onto the ceiling.
Yes.
And it's only a shadow of himself, but he looks so small in the scene, and he's trapped. And he's and at this point in the film, you think like, well, he's for it clearly because she's framed him, and she's trapped him. And that's it.
Curtiz is so brilliant. I mean, that scene is fantastic because that sense of being disorientated, confused, trapped, alone, right? It's conveyed through a whole series of shots. The spiraling staircase going up, right? You know, kind of that sense of of confusion, really, is kind of conveyed so well through that kind of concatenation of shots. And each of them is visually arresting. And the thing that you were saying about, the mirrors, aside from the off-screen space, I think what you described is that they're also very expressive, right? So they're not just showing you something that is taking place off camera, but actually they're showing you something that is taking place off camera and adding something on. So what you said, right? She's kind of being lowered to finding this job and actually having the mirror be in the bottom kind of conveys that, right? Yeah. Whereas, you know, if you just kind of seen the help wanted ad, it wouldn't quite have conveyed this thing of, you know.
That would give you the information
Yeah.
she is looking for a job in the kind of place that puts up a help wanted sign.
Yeah.
But as you say, actually putting her below the camera on the ground
Yes.
is much more expressive.
It conveys a feeling, or kind of, you know, something that much more. What did you think of Joan Crawford? Have you seen other Joan Crawford films before this?
I knew you were going to ask that.
I don't think I have. No.
No, I am terrible with names. I don't think I have either.
If you had, you'd have remembered.
Yeah, I feel like I would have remembered just the expression with the eyes, which completely kind of taken with. I think it was fascinating to see how measured she was. I suppose as a character, Mildred is always trying to kind of do the best, but she's always kind of sat there considering, but you see a lot in that kind of, in what she's doing, so she's not overly dramatic, but you see kind of what's going on, so that whether it's a kind of a fear or a twinkle in her eye or something, I think, I know I've said it before, but I genuinely think she could just tell so much just by what she's doing with her eyes. That's fascinating.
Yes, it's quite amazing actually what she does with her eyes. Mike, what did you think of her?
Well, I made a comment during the film that when she, as I said, when she's kind of looking off into space, particularly when her daughter's being, pretty nasty or pretty self-centered, that you kind of think like, oh, so she's going to kill her too, or she wants to. Like at this point, you kind of think that Mildred is the murderess.
Yes, I think she's very beautiful. Like she's got a very striking, beautiful face, right? That's kind of unlike any other, like those cheekbones, you know, in the eyes and so on. And on the other hand, there's something like almost scarily strong about what she represents.
Yeah, I wondered if they were doing that with the clothing as well. Like, I don't know if anybody else noticed the shoulder pads. I wanted to see just how big the shoulder pads would go, because that kind of fur that she's wearing, I was like, how much of that is going out? But it was almost the more control she had. So when she's first introduced, she's wearing very normal kind of housewife clothes. And then as she has more power, the shoulder pads just seem to get bigger.
Yeah, the shoulders get wider and wider.
Well, she's just like this triangle in a way that just, it kind of...
Which is kind of masculine, the broad-shouldered thing.
But it kind of almost becomes a caricature when she's wearing that fur. But it was fascinating to see how that happened. And then when she's wearing the kind of almost masculine-esque clothes, so she's wearing a lot of things that kind of almost look like a suit, but with skirts, which I thought was fascinating to kind of add to that edge of femininity and masculinity, but also made her look a bit scary sometimes when she's very kind of in control and very up to the neck, whereas Veda is wearing sequins and shiny things. So yeah, I thought that was fascinating. That the costumes really kind of worked, I thought.
What do you think of the contrast between Veda and Mildred, right? Because, I mean, obviously they're mother-daughter, right? And obviously Mildred loves her immeasurably. But I think in the film they're also representing two different kinds of women, right? And the film judges each, has a point of view on each.
I think it's kind of interesting that Veda is, like everything that Veda, the way that she behaves and everything that she kind of thinks, has something to do with men. And the way she appears to men, and the way that she will affect men, and the way that she can get things from men, and kind of use them to elevate her lifestyle and so on. And I don't think that's the case with Mildred. I don't even think it's the case with Mildred that she kind of behaves in a certain way to kind of beat men at their own game. You know, because actually, like when it comes to the business world, you don't really see her in that kind of competitive mode. You see her building a business for herself. I mean, I guess it only gets competitive towards the end when Wally kind of manoeuvres and tries to take over.
But that's only because of Monty.
Yeah, but like, in terms of sort of in terms of building the business and that sort of thing, you know, I guess she kind of does kind of manipulate Monty because they know that Monty clearly needs the money, and so they can make this deal to get the building a year before they have to pay for it, so they can make the money and so on. And he'll go for it.
She offers him something, doesn't she?
Right, she offers him something. So there's not a huge kind of competitive thing, and I don't think it's a kind of masculine, feminine, man v woman, kind of competition thing. Basically, building the business is something that is completely personal to her.
Well, it's her way. I mean, the reason I think there's an interesting both similarity and difference. So, on the one hand, they're both alike in that, they both want to be successful, right? But Mildred wants to be successful for Veda. Veda just wants all the finer things in life. And in fact, this thing about men, I think kind of from her, men are a way of getting the finer things in life. But I think she's much more interested in the finer things in life, polo and jewelry and going to the right places, than she is actually in men.
There's that very revealing conversation right at the start when the other daughter's asleep and they're sitting on the bed talking to each other, and the conversation is about love and marrying someone for love. And Mildred basically says you should marry for love. That's the point of marriage.
Well, at that point, her daughter wants to sell her, basically sell her, so she can have the finer things in life, right? So, I mean, it's just...
But then it comes back, I forget exactly what the moment is, but it does come back where Veda has a moment of kind of returning to that question of should you marry for love or not.
Well, that's the thing with, is it Teddy? The guy that she briefly marries.
Yeah. And she does kind of change her mind, and she does kind of come around to what her mum. I forget the moment though. I mean, that's annoying. I forget the line or the moment it is, but I'm sure there's a point where it's quite explicit that she has changed her tune on the reasons to marry.
Well, Veda, you mean?
Yeah, I'm sure there was a moment.
I don't think she does.
I don't think she does either.
No, I think.
Have to find the fucking bit.
I think when she briefly marries, I'm going to call him Teddy because in my head that's his name. It's about getting money out of him and pretending that she's pregnant when she's not, and he's saying like, "Why do we have to get divorced?"
Yeah, he's in love with her.
Yeah, and she is clearly using him, and
yes.
then she's been flirting with Monty the entire time.
Yes.
And then when they're caught, she says that I thought you were going to marry me. You said you were going to marry me, but I don't buy that it was a love thing. I think it felt very much like you have the status. I believe that you can keep me in the way that she has become accustomed to, but it didn't ever feel like she was capable of feeling love, because I don't think if she was capable of feeling love that she would have treated her mother in the way that she did.
And in fact, Monty treats her in the way that she thinks of her mother, as just like this low-class chippy that so again kind of there's an interesting kind of mirroring or similarities between the mother and the daughter. So obviously they're very different. One loves the other one madly, the other one is kind of like using the mother as but in many ways, I mean, they both want success, though for different reasons. They're also very different. One works for it, kind of, the other one manipulates in order to get it. Right, yeah, but kind of there's a lot of there's very interesting similarities between them.
But it's interesting because it is looking at success, and you sort of said, how does it treat them? And Veda wants success, and she wants to marry well, and she wants to find somebody that will keep her in the way that she is used to, but ultimately ends up in prison, so ends up penniless. And her mother, who works for it and tries to, essentially the same thing happens.
Loses it all. So you kind of like, it seems to be suggesting that either of them isn't going to work. Well, again, I think there's very interesting similarities, because you can also imagine Mildred, now that her husband's dead, doesn't have to sell the whole place, because that he was the reason he was selling her out. Right, but now that he's dead, she's the widow, so she gets back her business. You
think Wally would have that after she tried to frame him, or do you think that he would see that as her having some of the, and that not manipulation, but that kind of nous that he'd done?
I think Wally was only doing it because the husband was selling her out. because Wally said, your husband is selling the business, and if he gets 30%, I go under. So she says, so in this way, only I go under. And he says, that's right. But it wasn't coming from Wally.
But do you think he would have kept that business relationship, given that she...
I think they would. They clearly have known each other since childhood, Wally and her, right? I mean, I think there's a comfort there. That's one of the interesting things. I don't think Wally's an evil guy.
No, but I just think if somebody tried to frame you for murder, whether or not you'd be like, that's all right.
Well, I think he understands.
I think he's quite forgiving.
Yeah.
He tries it on with her twice a week.
Yes. Yeah. That's a lot of forgiveness.
I suppose I kind of almost want to see a deleted scene of those two meeting again after, because I've...
Post-credit scene, like Marvel.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I think what I find interesting about the film is how easily and how acceptingly Veda accepts her, being...
kind of almost fall from grace.
Yeah, her fall from grace. Because, the scene when the father takes Mildred Pierce to the nightclub, I mean, that's so powerful because basically, I think that's a 40s equivalent of, a father taking a mother to show her daughter working as a prostitute, right? Because actually that's clearly what's being indicated, right?
Yeah.
So she's a singer, in a low dive. But, from what she's wearing and the men's reactions to her,
They're sailors.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the equivalent of, saying your daughter's become a whore, right? And here she is at work, right? It's very powerful.
Yeah, she's not a waitress.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's something lower, right?
Yeah.
The bit that I was referring to earlier, I found the script, and I checked because I had to check, and I kind of remembered it accurately, but at the same time, it's when Mildred's being told that they're getting married, and then she admits we're already married, and then she kind of breaks down and says, something, I've made a mistake, I didn't have to tell you. She says, don't you love Ted? And she goes, no, mother. Maybe we don't belong in a family like that, blah, blah, blah. But then the next scene is where...
Contradicts it.
Yeah.
Is where she goes, oh, I'm pregnant. So clearly she's just being a lying little hussy.
Yes. Throughout. Right.
So no, she hasn't changed her tune, has she, by the end of the film?
No.
Because then she's going off with Monty as well, or thinks she is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's almost like incest, right? That's really bad because... by this point, Mildred is married to Monty.
Oh, but they've been setting that up from the beginning. You could see that. So
yeah, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been creepy. I mean, I was creeped out from the start.
Yeah,
when I saw his little moustache, to be honest.
I've
never trust men in films with moustaches.
He became a kind of a sex symbol with this film, actually.
Really?
Well, then
Yes.
I have nothing but opprobrium for the people of the 1940s.
He did. And actually he's shown, women are normally shown in this period. Right, he's shown in his bathing suit with his shirt off, with those legs.
Yeah, I did think that seemed an interesting look.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the cardigan, and then suddenly he appears, and I'm like, he forgot his trousers.
Well, kind of in the beach house.
I asked Celia, because as we know, Celia's been on the podcast before, is a huge 40s fan. I've asked her what she thinks of Mildred Pierce, and she's been telling me. So I thought I might just read out a little bit, because she said, well, for one thing, she said she only saw it for the first time recently. Which I thought was interesting.
How remiss of her.
She said, I wasn't interested in that kind of thing at all when I was younger, women's pictures or whatever, but it was super engrossing. I felt like I'd really lived after it, she says. She says, I never used to like this kind of thing. I was 100% screwball comedies and film noir, and melodrama was just ooh, not for me. But it's not the thing itself, but Joan Crawford. If you're in the comedy mode, you don't rub shoulders with her often. Same with Bette Davis. But I really like them both. It's not like they're relatable or something, because they're not. They're elemental. Joan Crawford is under this extreme tension. The chasm between that sweet butter wouldn't melt thing she'd started to do by this point, and the balls of brass woman she really was, and you're just willing her to snap. I love the perversity of her, the monstrous feminine, but it's like she doesn't have time for that shit, for the constraints of being a woman in 1941.
45.
Well, maybe she's talking about something else at that point.
Yeah.
She says, I don't know that any of this is specific to Mildred Pierce, but the idea of Joan Crawford being kind of elemental
is
an interesting one.
It kind of fits. And actually, the period, though, is important, right? Because 1945, the war is over, all the men are returning from work, and they're kicking the women out of the jobs.
From work.
Right? Yeah, so they're all, they're all having to return to be housewives, right? So this idea of this businesswoman who started a chain of restaurants, and it has kind of also a particular resonance, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, but that's a great quote from Celia, actually.
Good.
Yeah.
I'll tell her.
Maybe a last thing to talk about is.
Well, I have one thing I'd like to bring up.
Okay.
But if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to talk about Veda a little more because, the ending where they're taking her to jail and she tells her mother, I'll manage, right, is like, again, I find it so powerful, right? Because here's this woman who's been striving for money, position, appearance. Like, she tells Mildred, oh, you were born above a shop or something. Your mother was a laundress or whatever she says. Right? And kind of all of a sudden she's going to prison and it's like, I can cope with this. Right? Like, I thought that was so interesting. It's a sign of both her evilness and also her powerfulness. That she's going to go to jail and she's actually doesn't seem very phased at all. She'll just manage. It's a different place for her to scheme at.
I feel like it's just another power structure for her to conquer and find her kind of willing mother-esque figure within there.
Yes.
So yeah, Veda Goes to Prison would be a great film.
Veda Pierce, King of the Prisoners.
Actually, that's such a good idea. Yeah. Which I wish somebody would make that film. Veda in prison.
Yeah.
Veda Prison Mama. So you were going to say something?
Yeah, there's one. Right back at the start of the conversation, we talked about the mystery of the setup of who this guy is and why he was shot. And you said, Laura, that it never occurred to you to come back to it.
It didn't not occur to me. I just didn't care.
Okay, so fair enough. That's still an interesting point that you didn't care. Because it wasn't like it was on my mind the whole time. It wasn't like I was constantly thinking, okay, but how does this relate to what happened at the end? Like I was just in the story and I was going with it, But there were points where I was kind of going, okay, so that's why she killed him. Like towards the end when he's going to take over the business, you think, okay, well she's done it to protect her business.
Yes.
At least I did. So it was kind of slightly on my mind. And it reminded me of, there's a short story called The Husband Stitch, which I read probably last year, which is freely available and it's really, really worth reading. It's by Carmen Maria Mercado.
Are you going to link it in the comments?
I'll probably do that, yeah.
That would be great.
It's called The Husband Stitch, and it's a story, I can't remember all the details, but it's basically, it's told in the first person from a woman's perspective, and it says that she was born with this green ribbon around her neck, and you're not told what it does or why it's there or where it came from or anything like that, but it's just about how people relate to it. Every woman has one. It's not necessarily around their neck, something's around their ankle, something's around their wrist. Every woman has a green ribbon somewhere on their body, though, in this story. And kind of guys that she goes out with, they want to know what it's about. They're tugging at it and they want to touch it. She's like, no, you don't get to touch it. And again, this was something that I talked about with Celia. We talked about this story, and I said I totally wanted to know throughout the story what the green ribbon was about. I wanted to know what it was and why it was there and so on. Like all the guys in the story. And Celia said that at no point did that occur to her to ask that question, which I thought was really interesting because for her it was about how the woman related to her and what it meant for her life and so on and so forth, but not about actually what it kind of specifically was. And I think in a way that's kind of similar to our differing reactions to the central mystery in Mildred Pierce.
Yeah.
Kind of I had a slightly more practical approach to it, I think, maybe. You kind of said, okay, well that's just set up and I don't care.
Well, in part, I think I've watched so many films that I'd already guessed who it was, and I was like, that's probably going to be it, and it was. But also, I think you're correct. I think it was, for me, the interest was less in who did it and why, and more about them and their characters and their interplay and what that would mean for them going on.
Because it's interesting then, because it is, as you say, a woman's film about all these women interplaying in interesting ways, but the setup right at the start is something that I think is appealing to guys.
Well, it's a film noir, right? And actually, part of the reason why it's kind of still so striking is because usually there would be a man, I think, playing Mildred's role, really. You know, kind of, you know, so, and Veda would be like the femme fatale. So it's an interesting kind of spread where the femme fatale is a daughter, you know, and the noir hero is, you know, a woman, and this mad love that leads to destruction is a mother-daughter love, right? I mean, that's what's so interesting and weird about the film.
It actually makes me think that the flashback structure is not necessary for the film to function. I don't think that, you know, like I said, I was kind of thinking about it, but it wasn't, I don't think it would have affected my interest in the story had there not been this kind of thing of, and at some point we're going to get to the murder. You know, if it had been a very straight told story where you start off with Mildred, her husband loses his job and so on and so forth, if it was just a flashback told straight, and then at the end a murder happened from sort of out of nowhere, okay, it might not fit the kind of the certain film noir tropes, but I don't think it would affect the functioning of the story. It might make it better in some ways.
Well, Todd Haynes obviously did the miniseries with Kate Winslet. Right, and it is done very differently because, you know, kind of, without censorship, you could do it very differently, you know, and there are kind of very considerable differences. They're both great. They both kind of, but they work on a different level, you know, and the story is not told through flashbacks.
Right.
I think for me, I was thinking about it in context of having seen Widows recently. I know you guys have done the 2 podcasts on it, but for me, the thing that whenever anybody asks me about Widows, is that I sort of went, actually, it feels really carefully paced, but the interesting thing to me was not the heist, because the heist to me just felt like every other heist movie I'd ever seen. It was the women and how they reacted and how they did what they did.
Yes.
And to me, that was the same with this. I was less interested in the whodunit angle, but I was interested in the characters and how they came to be, or what they did, or how they behaved.
That makes sense to me. I understand that. Yeah. Okay.
You see, there is a precedent for films that pick up on a genre and do something else with it. I mean, actually, one thing that I should have said in that podcast, where you said, you know, why is this? Why do you think this isn't that unique?
Hold on. Does that mean you're going to go and see it a third time?
No, absolutely not. It's you know, horror. You're always talking about, and it's quite a common kind of point of view that horror is a way for films to talk about kind of social issues or whatever they might be through a genre convention. That's not very common. Sci-fi, I think, does similar things, and sci-fi and horror actually quite often kind of cross-pollinate. But you know, so I think that was something that I should have brought up when we were talking about Widows. I still think that the way that Widows does it, what it's doing, is really interesting. But the fact that it does it is not the interesting thing. The fact that it sets up a heist and then talks about other things is not the interesting part. It's how it does it.
Okay, well, but you know, you couldn't have the how without the what. So, like, they're interrelated, really. And likewise, this film, just to kind of bring back the discussion into it, because you know, it is really kind of an intermingling of noir, of a crime film, of melodrama, of a woman's film, and actually, it's kind of that particular iteration or performance of, you know, or kind of, you know, bringing together all of these genres through this story that is one of the things that I think still makes the film kind of so fascinating and compelling, and it still kind of keeps it working, really.
I guess one of the things that I found interesting about it was that from the very little I knew about it, I mean, you basically gave us a précis before we watched it of this is one of the great film noirs. And in a way, I was kind of watching going, where is the noir? You know, like it's not kind of heavily about crime. It's not about kind of gangsters and kind of competing sort of macho things, which I think is something that I really associate with noir. And also, it's kind of, I mean, visually, it's kind of quite light. So I think another thing you expect from noir is kind of dark visuals. And
this is very shadowy. The shadow is everywhere.
It does use shadow quite a lot, to be fair. But I mean, you know, apart from that very opening, and I guess the few scenes you get in the police station, you know, I'm kind of thinking like, where is the noir? Like, what's interesting about it is that it does depart kind of so much, but it is still there. You know, the whole thing about the femme fatale and the way that these people kind of, the way that these people kind of compete, I guess, has that darkness to it.
Yes, it's very dark. I mean, think about it. You know, it's a film that it has a murder, it has gigolos, it had people only obsessed with money. It's a film in which, you know, a daughter tries to take her mother's husband, you know, and is clearly sleeping with him. You know, it's a film which kind of, you know, which has the husband kind of sleeping with, you know, the neighbor. It's a film in which kind of people are basically interested in money and kind of, you know, get rid of anything in the way of that, right? So this combination of money, sex, crime, it's very noir, right?
But not sort of, not so much so that it's, you know, it still has that kind of combination with more of a family drama.
Sure, it's that,
you know,
it is that
like
also, yeah.
If you know, if it were kind of straight up noir, people would be much more ruthless, I think.
Yeah.
You know,
I feel like there were less kind of looming shots, apart from that kind of opening bit. I expected more looming.
I do think that,
that's interesting.
I do think there's a visual lightness to it that is more associated with a, well, like a woman's film, perhaps, or like a melodrama about family and so on.
But to me, that almost
it's not heavy on that darkness of style.
But to me, that almost made it darker because it was, aside from the murder, quite ordinary. In that sense.
I don't know about that. I mean, you know, it'd be interesting if you see it again because, you know, all of the opening sequence enshrouded in darkness.
Yeah.
You know, the scene in the beach house at the beginning enshrouded in darkness. There's so many nightclub scenes which are kind of completely shadowy. A lot of the scenes in the police station are completely shadowy. Even things like when Mildred gets Wally to agree to help her set the restaurant, that's all done in shadows. You know, there's kind of, you have the shadow thrown on the wall of Wally and Mildred making the deal, you know, basically clapping hands. So I think, you know...
That to me feels like, and this is probably splitting hairs, but those elements are definitely there and they're noticeable. But for instance, when you see shadows being cast on walls, people leaving rooms and so on and so forth, which you do see quite a lot, they do feel like sort of stylistic film noir intrusions into an otherwise normal world, as opposed to a film noir world that you're totally enveloped in. There's actually a sort of, not clash, but a meeting of kind of normality and darkness. Visually.
Okay, well that's into that. I mean, I find that interesting because, I have to think about that. It's not the way I see it, right? Because basically the whole film is a murder happens. You see her about to commit suicide, you know, and then she's taken in by the police, and really the whole thing ostensibly happens at the police station, right? And then kind of you get flashbacks. So, you know, I see it as a very dark and shadowy and enclosed world, really, yeah. And that's kind of what I remember from it.
Fair enough.
But would you recommend it?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's already some people that I think I'd go and wave copies of DVDs at.
Okay, well, so that was great. Thank you very much, Laura.
I was going to say,
Good.
thank you for having me.
I'm glad you came.
Good, I'm glad, Mike, because, you know, kind of I felt I was dragging Mike into this. Thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies.
We're on iTunes, SoundCloud and YouTube to listen to. You can follow us on Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies and on Facebook. And our website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com with the full list of all the movies we've done.
Yes. This is our last podcast on Curtiz films, at least for a while, though we are going to be looking at classic films as a regular feature, though Mike has dibs on at least the next 4 choices.
Yeah, some of them you might not count as classics as well. I mean, there's one from about 2008. There's one from, I want to watch Hook.
Right.
So, you know, for me, that's a classic.
Right.
So it's not exactly classic.
A loose definition of classics.
Not exactly classics, but I don't want to kind of close it off to like either we see films that are out at the cinema or films from the 1940s.
No, I'm with you.
We should see absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting.
So on the list of podcasts on the website, I've called it classics and catching up because you know Hook is not a classic to anyone but me, but it is fun to catch up with.
Fairly big childhood classic for most people.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Of a certain generation. Right, thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Laura?
Oh, bye.
Okay, excellent. Let me open the window a little bit because I think I've got the heat on too high.